The sound of rain had always reminded Min of home. Not the bustling streets of Saigon with their endless noise, but the way the rain would fall against the cracked windows of his small dojo, soft at first, then swelling until it drowned the city's pulse. That sound had once been peace to him. Now, years later, as he stood under the steel-gray sky of Los Angeles, the same rhythm felt like an echo of a world he could never return to. In Saigon, people used to call him Thay Min, Master Min. His dojo sat between a tea shop and a mechanic's garage in District 5, where the scent of motor oil mixed with incense smoke and sweat. He had built it from nothing. Bamboo flooring scavenged from an old warehouse, mirrors donated by a retired tailor, and the wooden Mach Nun dummy carved by his own hands. Children from the alleys came to him, barefoot and curious, their laughter breaking the humid air as he taught them the first stanzas of Vịnh Xuân. He wasn't a man of many words. When he taught, he moved slowly, his voice low, the syllables carrying both authority and patience. "Don't fight to win," he used to tell them. "Fight to understand." And when they didn't understand, he would demonstrate. A parry that looked like a caress, a strike that ended before the eye could follow. He made violence look like grace. The dojo became a second home for those kids, or maybe their only one. Some of them came from families broken by debt or drugs. Some, like Tuan, were raised by the streets themselves. Tuan was different. Where others hesitated, he lunged. He learned faster than anyone Min had ever taught. His punches were sharp, his footwork precise, but his eyes burned with something Min couldn't calm, that restless fire of someone who had already decided that the world owed him something. One afternoon after class, Tuan stayed behind. "Thay," he asked, "why do we stop our strikes before they land?" Min looked at him. "Because knowing you can end something is enough. You don't have to prove it." Tuan frowned. "But if they don't fear you, they'll never respect you." Min smiled faintly, a sadness flickering beneath it. "Respect isn't born from fear. It's born from restraint." Tuan didn't answer. He just nodded, but his jaw tightened, and Min knew he hadn't really heard him. Weeks passed. The air grew thicker with monsoon heat. Rumors began to drift through the neighborhood. A gang preying on small vendors, extorting money from shop owners. One night, Min heard shouting from across the street. He went outside and saw Tuan standing over another boy, fists bloodied, eyes wild. The other boy wasn't moving. Min ran to them. "Stop!" he shouted, grabbing Tuan's wrist. The boy turned, his face streaked with rain and rage. "He disrespected me, Thay. He said our school was weak." Min looked down at the motionless body, at the crimson mixing with rainwater. His stomach turned cold. "Tuan, look at what you've done." For a moment, Tuan's eyes softened. Just a flicker of fear, regret, then hardened again. He tore his arm free. "You taught me to defend myself." "No," Min said, his voice trembling. "I taught you to defend others." The police arrived minutes later. The crowd swallowed them both, but only one walked away that night. The other was carried into an ambulance under flashing lights that painted everything red and blue and unreal. After that night, the dojo emptied. Parents stopped sending their children. The old tailor took back his mirrors. The floorboards creaked like bones. Min sat alone in the dark for hours, staring at the Mach Nun dummy. Every groove, every dent on its wooden arms felt like a question he could never answer. He closed the door the next morning, leaving the sign, "Vịnh Xuân, balance in motion," to fade in the sun. He packed a single suitcase, burned the certificates on his wall, and left without saying goodbye. The decision to leave Vietnam was not dramatic. It was quiet. He stood at Tan Son Nhut Airport with a one-way ticket to California and a silence so complete it felt like punishment. As the plane rose above the city, he looked down at the tangled maze of rooftops and imagined the rain washing it all away. The dojo, the children, the blood. But guilt, he would learn, doesn't dissolve in distance. It only changes color. Los Angeles greeted him with neon lights and a cold he wasn't prepared for. He took a room in a shared apartment with 4 other immigrants, men who worked in construction, women who cleaned hotel rooms, all of them chasing some version of survival. Min didn't speak much English, but he didn't need to. His hands did the talking, scrubbing, lifting, cleaning, mending. After a few weeks, he found a job at a small Chinese-Vietnamese restaurant called Golden Panda. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. The owner, Mr. Lee, was an old man with a sharp tongue and a soft heart. He eyed Min up and down on the first day, thin frame, quiet eyes, the kind of man no one would notice in a crowd. "You wash dishes?" Mr. Lee asked. "Yes." "You do it fast?" "I do it clean." Mr. Lee chuckled. "Good answer." And just like that, Min became part of the kitchen. The work was hard. Constant steam, clattering plates, the hiss of oil from the woks. His hands blistered at first, the skin raw from soap and heat, but he never complained. Every night, he stood behind the sink, a ghost among cooks who shouted orders in 3 different languages. When they joked, he smiled faintly. When they argued, he kept silent. Sometimes, in the middle of the chaos, he'd find a strange calm. The rhythm of washing, rinsing, stacking. It was like a kata, a form. The water flowed over his hands, scalding yet cleansing, and he could almost imagine it washing something deeper than grease. Mr. Lee noticed. "You move like a man who used to fight," he said one night while closing up. Min froze, a plate halfway through his rinse. "I used to teach." "What, English?" "No." Mr. Lee squinted at him. "Ah. Kung Fu?" Min smiled for the first time in weeks. "Something like that." The old man nodded as if he'd expected it. "Good. Maybe one day you show me some. For now, finish cleaning the fryer." They laughed. It was a small moment, but for Min, it felt like breathing again. Days turned into months. He learned the names of regular customers, the rhythm of the restaurant, the lunch rush, the lull of mid-afternoon, the quiet before closing. Sometimes he would watch the street from the kitchen window, the homeless man who slept under the awning, the high school kids who skateboarded past, the couples arguing in the rain. Los Angeles was loud, restless, and lonely. Yet somehow it accepted him without question. He never mentioned his past. The other workers called him Dishwasher Min. He didn't correct them. It was easier that way. At night, when the city went still, he would walk back to his apartment through the drizzle. The neon signs blurred in the puddles, red, blue, green, like the lights of that ambulance years ago. Sometimes he would pause at an alley and see shadows sparring in his memory. A boy with fire in his eyes, a teacher with trembling hands. Then he would keep walking, shoulders hunched, as if the rain could hide him. But some habits refused to die. In his tiny apartment, he cleared a space beside his bed, barely 2 meters wide, and practiced Sil Lim Tao, the first form of Vịnh Xuân. Slow, deliberate, each movement a meditation. He didn't strike, didn't kick. He just breathed. The muscles remembered what his heart wanted to forget. One evening, after work, a few of the younger cooks invited him for drinks. He declined politely, saying he was tired. They shrugged and went without him. When he returned to the kitchen to retrieve his jacket, he found Mr. Lee sitting alone, staring at the accounts book. "Tough night?" Min asked softly. Mr. Lee sighed. "Every night is tough. Business is down, rent is up, and now some idiots are asking for protection money." Min looked up. "Gangsters?" Mr. Lee nodded. "They come around sometimes, They think because I'm old I'll pay, but I've seen worse in Hong Kong. Still, he hesitated, looking at Min's calm face. You've got the look of someone who's seen worse, too. Min didn't respond. He just washed his hands, turned off the tap, and said, "Try to stay inside after dark." That night, as he walked home, he noticed a car parked across the street from the restaurant. Dark windows, engine idling. A man leaned out, smoking, watching. Min felt something stir in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. That instinct, the one forged in hours of sparring and silence. The instinct of danger. He told himself it wasn't his problem. He was a dishwasher now. Violence was a language he no longer spoke. But as he lay awake later, listening to the rain on the roof, he thought of Mr. Lee's trembling hands, of the children back in Saigon, of the blood mixing with rain. He closed his eyes and whispered the old mantra his master had taught him, soft as water, still as mountain, strike only when no other path remains. He wanted to believe he could live by it. He wanted to believe the path of stillness was enough. For months, peace held. The gang didn't return, business improved slightly, and the restaurant fell into its steady rhythm again. Min learned to laugh at the cook's jokes, to hum softly as he worked. Yet deep down, a current moved beneath the calm, a quiet unease that something was coming. And then, one night, it did. It was raining again, the kind of relentless, drumming rain that blurred the world into watercolor. The Golden Panda was about to close when the door burst open and 5 men walked in, bringing the storm with them. Their boots left muddy prints on the clean floor. Their eyes scanned the room like predators. Mr. Lee froze behind the counter. Min looked up from the sink. The past, it seemed, had found him again. He wiped his hands slowly, the warm water still running, and turned toward them. His heartbeat was steady, almost unnaturally so. He could already sense their movements, the weight on their heels, the shift of shoulders, the smell of cheap liquor. "Mr. Lee!" one shouted. "You owe us! Time to pay up!" The old man's voice trembled. "Please, just give me a few days." The thug's fist hit the counter. Dishes rattled. Min felt something in him tighten, the same tension that had once preceded a fight, the same silence that came before a storm. He didn't move. Not yet. The leader grabbed Mr. Lee's collar, pulling him halfway across the counter. The cooks backed away. One of them whispered, "Call the cops." But no one moved. Through the thin veil of steam rising from the sink, Min's reflection wavered. Half shadow, half ghost. His fingers flexed unconsciously, recalling the forms he'd sworn to forget. "Hey, you!" one of the gangsters barked, noticing him. "You just gonna stand there, dishwasher?" Min's eyes lifted. For a heartbeat, the world went still. The rain, the shouting, the chaos, everything compressed into the space between breaths. And somewhere inside him, the rain of Saigon began to fall again. He stepped forward. The sound of water hitting steel faded, replaced by the slow, rising drumbeat of something inevitable. The past was no longer behind him. It had walked right through the door, and he would have to face it. Not as Master Min, not as the man he once was, but as the dishwasher who could no longer hide from his own reflection. And in that moment, under the flickering neon sign that read Golden Panda, the story of the dishwasher martial artist truly began. The door slammed open with the force of thunder, sending a bell clanging against the glass. Rain spilled in with the 5 men who entered, tall, broad, dripping with arrogance. Their jackets were soaked, their boots heavy with mud, their tattoos glistening like oil under the fluorescent light. The restaurant's warm scent of soy and ginger was instantly replaced by the stench of cigarette smoke and wet leather. Mr. Lee froze behind the counter, his frail hands still gripping a towel. One of the men, the largest, with a scar tracing his cheek, smirked. "Evening, old man," he said, his voice rough as gravel. We're here for your payment." No one spoke. The cooks exchanged nervous glances. The rain kept beating on the glass, a steady rhythm of doom. Min stood by the sink, the water still running, the steam blurring his reflection on the metal counter. He could hear every detail: the scrape of a chair, the flick of a lighter, the sound of boots shifting weight. He didn't need to look. His body remembered these sounds from another life. Mr. Lee tried to sound calm. "I told you before, business is slow. Give me one more week." The scarred man chuckled. "You've had weeks, old man." He turned to his crew. "Maybe we take something else as collateral, huh?" One of them grabbed a bottle of soy sauce and hurled it against the wall. Glass shattered, brown liquid splattering across the tiles. Another kicked over a chair. The cooks backed away. One whispered, "Call the police," but no one dared move. Min turned off the tap. The silence that followed was sharp as a blade. He could feel their attention shifting toward him, the outsider, the quiet man who had never spoken louder than necessary. "Hey," one of the thugs said, pointing. "You, dishwasher, you gonna just stand there while your boss gets robbed?" Min's eyes rose slowly, calm and unreadable. "This is not your place," he said softly, his accent cutting through the tension. The men laughed. "Oh, he talks," another sneered. "What you gonna do, huh? Scrub us clean?" Min said nothing. He simply stepped out from behind the sink. The scarred man shoved Mr. Lee aside and turned toward him. "You want to be a hero, old man?" Min's voice was even, almost gentle. "I'm no hero." The scarred man's smirk faded. "Then you better stay out of the way." He lunged forward, a blur of motion, but Min wasn't there. The man's fist cut through steam and air. Min's body tilted just enough to let it pass. His left hand brushed the man's forearm, redirecting its force. The next moment, his right palm snapped forward, not hard, just precise, connecting with the side of the man's jaw. A dull crack. The thug collapsed, his body folding like paper. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then chaos erupted. Another man swung a metal chair. Min dropped low, feeling the rush of air above his head. His elbow rose, striking the man's ribs. A gasp, then a groan. Min flowed like water, never stopping, never striking twice where once was enough. The third thug rushed in, knife glinting in his hand. The blade slashed toward Min's chest, but he stepped inside the attack, trapping the man's wrist between his own. A quick twist. The knife clattered to the floor, followed by a cry of pain. Min's knee lifted sharply, connecting with the thug's stomach, folding him in half. Two left. Their faces were pale now, unsure whether to run or fight. The smell of fear mixed with soy and smoke. Min turned to them slowly, his stance small, centered, balanced. "Leave," he said. But pride is a stubborn poison. One of them roared and charged. Min sidestepped, caught his jacket and spun him into the wall. The man's head hit the plaster with a sickening thud. The last one froze, shaking, then dropped his weapon and stumbled toward the door. He looked back once and saw Min's eyes, calm and distant, as if none of this had happened at all. Then he ran into the rain. Silence. Only the sound of water dripping from the broken bottles, the hiss of oil cooling on the stove. Mr. Lee stood behind the counter, trembling. "Min," he whispered. "What? What was that?" Min exhaled slowly, wiping his hands on a towel. "It's finished. You fought like—" He didn't let him finish. "No, Mr. Lee," Min said quietly. "I don't fight anymore." He turned away, heading back toward the sink. The floor was littered with broken glass, overturned chairs, spilled sauce. He knelt and began to clean, his movements deliberate, controlled. Outside, police sirens began to wail in the distance. By the time they arrived, the thugs were groaning on the floor, too dazed to resist. The officers asked questions. Mr. Lee tried to explain, his voice trembling between disbelief and gratitude. Min stayed silent. One officer, a young woman with sharp eyes, approached him. "You did this?" Min shook his head. "They fell." The officer frowned. "They fell?" "Yes," he said simply. "Sometimes gravity is unforgiving." She looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to read something behind his calm expression. Then she sighed and walked away. When it was over, Mr. Lee sat beside him on an overturned chair. "You saved my life," he said quietly. Min kept his eyes on the floor. "I broke my promise." Mr. Lee frowned. "Promise? I swore I'd never use these hands for violence again." Mr. Lee looked at his trembling fingers, the same hands that had just dismantled 5 armed men. "Then maybe tonight wasn't violence," he said. "Maybe it was mercy." Min didn't answer. He stood, took off his apron, and hung it on the wall. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The rain began to ease. The city outside was waking again. Sirens fading, puddles reflecting the amber glow of streetlights. Min stepped outside into the cold air. The smell of rain was sharp and clean. He closed his eyes. In the rhythm of the falling drops, he could almost hear Saigon again. The echo of his old dojo, the laughter of children, the sound of wooden dummies clacking under disciplined hands. A memory surfaced, uninvited. His master's voice, deep and measured. "A warrior who forgets why he fights becomes a weapon, not a man." Min had spent years trying not to be that weapon. But tonight, he had been forced to remember. As he walked home through the slick streets, his reflection followed him in every puddle, distorted, doubled, like 2 versions of himself walking side by side. One was the man who washed dishes, the other, the ghost of a fighter who could never wash away his past. He passed an alley where a group of boys were laughing, playing in the rain, pretending to box. He stopped and watched them. One of the boys threw a sloppy punch, overextending his arm. Min almost stepped forward to correct him, to show him balance, flow, control. But he stopped himself. The world didn't need another fighter. And yet, as he walked on, he felt something stir in his chest. Not pride, not anger, but something quieter. A pulse, a reminder. Maybe he couldn't escape who he was, but maybe he could decide why. The next day, the story spread. "Vietnamese dishwasher beats up 5 gangsters," the news headlines said. The cooks at Golden Panda whispered about him like he was some kind of legend. Mr. Lee couldn't stop smiling, though he never said a word. When Min arrived for work that afternoon, a new sign hung near the entrance. Carved wood, painted gold, protected by a dishwasher. He almost laughed. Almost. He picked up his apron and returned to the sink. The rhythm resumed. Rinse, wash, stack, repeat. Each motion steady, each breath measured. The chaos of the night before felt like a dream, or perhaps like waking from one. Outside, life moved on. The rain had stopped. The city was dry again, its neon heart still beating. But somewhere in the back of his mind, Min knew peace never lasted long. The streets had long memories. So did guilt. And somewhere, in the dark corners of Los Angeles, there were men who had just lost face, who would not forget the name Golden Panda or the quiet man who stood between them and an old shopkeeper. Min felt it, the slow tightening of fate, like the pause between strikes. He looked up at the window above the sink, at his reflection framed by the city's light. For a brief second, he thought he saw another shadow behind him. Younger, fiercer, the man he once was. Then it was gone. He rinsed the last dish, placed it carefully on the rack, and turned off the tap. Somewhere beyond the walls, thunder rolled again. And in that low, distant rumble, Min understood something. Storms never really end. They only circle back. He dried his hands, hung up the towel, and waited. Morning came with a pale, indifferent sun. The city moved as if nothing had happened the night before. Cars honking, coffee machines hissing, newspapers rustling in the hands of people who didn't know that violence had breathed inside a small Chinese Vietnamese restaurant just hours earlier. For Min, everything looked the same, yet everything felt changed. He arrived early at Golden Panda, long before the first customer. The place smelled of detergent and rain. Shattered glass had been swept up, the tables put back, the walls wiped clean. But to Min's eyes, every surface still carried the faint echo of movement, where a fist had swung, where a body had fallen. He could still trace the chaos in invisible lines through the air. He tied on his apron and began to wash dishes again, as if nothing had happened. The sound of running water filled the silence. It should have calmed him, but today, it didn't. The rhythm that once centered him now seemed to mock him. Each plate that slipped beneath his hands reminded him of how easily balance could shatter. Mr. Lee arrived a little later, carrying 2 cups of hot tea. He placed one near Min. "You didn't have to come today," he said. "You've done enough." Min shook his head. "If I stay home, I'll just think." Mr. Lee studied him quietly. "You've got ghosts in your eyes, my friend." Min gave a small smile. "They've been there a long time." The old man sighed. "What happened last night will spread. People will talk. Maybe more men will come." "I know," Min said. "And when they come, I'll talk again. Maybe they'll listen this time." Mr. Lee didn't answer. He just nodded and walked away, his shoulders slightly bent under the weight of things unsaid. Hours passed. The lunch crowd came and went, leaving behind the comforting noise of clinking chopsticks and laughter. From the outside, the restaurant looked alive again, but behind the kitchen door, Min moved like a man underwater. His mind kept replaying that moment. The first strike, the shift of his stance, the look in the scarred man's eyes just before he fell. He'd been trained to fight without hatred, to flow rather than destroy. But that night, something in him had broken open, something he'd locked away for years. The movement had been too natural, too effortless. When the rush slowed, Min stepped outside for air. The street smelled of wet asphalt and roasted duck. He lit a cigarette, his first in years. The smoke curled upward, dissolving into the pale afternoon light. Across the street, a group of teenagers laughed, shoving each other playfully. Their voices reminded him of his old students in Saigon, before everything went wrong. He closed his eyes, and the past came rushing back like a flood he'd tried too long to hold back. It was evening again, years ago. The dojo doors were open, the smell of incense still thick in the air. He remembered the sound of footsteps outside, hurried and uneven. Then Tuan's face had appeared in the doorway, bloody, wild-eyed. "They came for me, Tuan had gasped. "The gang from District 3. I had to fight back." "Fight back?" Min's voice had trembled. "What did you do?" Tuan's silence was the answer. The rest came in fragments. Sirens, flashing lights, the boy's lifeless body on the ground. The police report had called it manslaughter. Min called it failure. That night he'd gone back to the dojo, sat in front of the Moknun dummy, and wept. His tears had fallen onto the same floor where he once taught discipline and balance. He'd raised his hand, ready to strike the wooden figure, but couldn't. For the first time in his life, his hands had felt heavy, and now, years later, they were heavy again. He stubbed out the cigarette, staring at the smoke curling from its remains. The city blurred for a moment, as if it too were caught between memory and reality. Inside, the phone rang. Mr. Lee picked it up, spoke briefly in Chinese, then hung up with a sigh. "More reporters," he muttered. "They want to interview you." Min smiled faintly. "Tell them I'm just a dishwasher." Mr. Lee chuckled softly. "You keep saying that, but maybe you're more than that." Min shook his head. "Titles don't change the past." "Maybe not," the old man said. "But what we do next might." The afternoon drifted by, slow and heavy. Around 4, 2 policemen came by again. They asked questions about the fight, about whether Min had martial training. He answered politely but vaguely. The younger officer, the same woman from the night before, studied his hands as he spoke. They were scarred but steady. "You could have killed them," she said quietly. "I didn't," Min replied. "You could have," she repeated. Min looked at her, his expression unreadable. "A man who knows how to kill spends his life learning not to." The officer's eyes softened. "Then I hope you keep learning." When they left, Mr. Lee locked the door behind them. "You think they'll come back?" "The police?" Min asked. "No," Mr. Lee said. "The others." Min looked toward the street where the rain had begun again, soft and endless. "Yes," he said finally. "They always come back." Night returned like a curtain closing. The restaurant emptied. Min stayed behind to clean. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Each sound felt amplified, the scrape of metal, the splash of water, the distant echo of thunder. As he worked, he noticed a reflection in the steel sink, his own face, older, quieter, but behind it, the ghost of the man he used to be. For a moment he thought he saw his younger self standing beside him, barefoot, wearing the black training uniform of his old school. The younger Min looked at him silently, accusingly. He blinked, and the image vanished. Only his own tired reflection remained. He washed the last dish, set it on the rack, and turned off the tap. Then he walked to the front of the restaurant, unlocked the door, and stepped outside. The rain fell harder now, soaking through his shirt in seconds. The street was nearly empty, the neon lights of nearby shops flickering through the mist. He started walking, not sure where to. His footsteps splashed through puddles, echoing off the brick walls. Eventually, he stopped at a small park, deserted and glistening under the street lamps. There was a bench under an old oak tree. He sat down, the cold biting through him. For a while he just listened, to the rain, to the distant hum of traffic, to the quiet inside his own chest. He thought of his master again. The old man's words came back to him like fragments of a dream. Stillness is not absence of movement. It's control of it. Min closed his eyes, let the words sink in. Then, without realizing it, he began to move. Slowly at first, then with precision. The rain traced the outlines of his movements, hands deflecting invisible strikes, feet gliding on wet ground. Sil Lim Tao, the first form. In the soft glow of the streetlight, he looked like a phantom dancing with the rain. Each motion flowed into the next, as fluid as water, as quiet as regret. When he finished, he stood still for a long time, breathing deeply. The stillness returned, not the hollow kind, but one filled with acceptance. Then faintly he heard footsteps behind him. Heavy, familiar. He turned. A man stood there beneath a broken umbrella, watching him. His face was partially hidden, but Min recognized the stance, the swagger. The scarred man from the night before, bandaged now, eyes burning with humiliation and hate. Behind him were 2 others. Min didn't move. The rain fell harder, thunder rolling in the distance like a slow drum. "So it's true," the scarred man said, his voice thick with anger. "You think you can embarrass me in front of my crew, huh? You think this is over?" Min said nothing. He only watched him, his expression calm, his breathing even. "You made me look weak," the man continued. "Now I gotta make you disappear." He pulled a gun from his coat. The metal glinted under the streetlight. Min's eyes flicked once to the weapon, then back to the man's face. "Don't," he said quietly. The man sneered. "Why? You scared?" "No," Min said. "I'm sorry." He stepped forward once, slowly, deliberately. The man's finger tightened on the trigger. The next moment came faster than thought. A flash of movement, Min's body turning, stepping in, his arm slicing across the gunman's wrist. The shot went off into the air, echoing like thunder. Min's palm struck the man's chest. The gun fell, clattering across the pavement. The other two hesitated, but only for a second. They lunged. Min met them with precision, deflect, strike, pivot. The rain made the ground slippery, forcing him to adapt, to flow. He moved like a current, unpredictable and unstoppable. Within seconds, it was over. The two men lay groaning on the wet pavement. The scarred man clutched his chest, gasping, too stunned to move. Min stepped back, his breath steady. He looked down at them, not with anger, not with pride, but with a kind of weary pity. "Go," he said softly. "Before you do something you can't undo." The scarred man glared at him, eyes wide with a mix of fear and hatred, but then he spat blood, stumbled to his feet, and fled into the rain. The others followed. Min stood there for a long time after they were gone. The rain had soaked him completely. His hands trembled, not from exhaustion, but from the knowledge that he had crossed the line again. He'd promised himself he wouldn't fight. But promises, he realized, meant little in a world that refused to stay peaceful. He picked up the fallen gun, ejected the magazine, and threw both pieces into the gutter. Then he turned and began walking home, his footsteps slow, deliberate, each one heavier than the last. By the time he reached his apartment, dawn was breaking. The sky was the color of ash. He stripped off his wet clothes and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his hands. They didn't look like a fighter's hands anymore. They looked ordinary, but they still shook with the memory of motion. He closed his eyes. The sound of rain still echoed in his mind, like an old song he couldn't stop hearing. And somewhere, deep inside, he knew this wasn't the end. The storm was still moving, gathering force. He had stopped the first wave, but the tide was rising. He lay back on the bed, eyes open to the ceiling, and whispered the words his master had once told him in a tone of quiet warning. When the world refuses peace, the still man must decide what his stillness is worth. Outside, the city began to stir. The first rays of light touched the wet streets, turning puddles into mirrors. In one of them, briefly, the reflection of a man in fighting stance flickered, and then vanished with the wind. The following days moved with deceptive quiet, like the still surface of a pond concealing the churn beneath. The sun came back to Los Angeles, washing away the rain, leaving behind the smell of asphalt and renewal. The city pulsed as usual, buses groaning down cracked streets, vendors shouting, music leaking from apartment windows. Yet beneath that rhythm, Min felt the disturbance in the current, the kind that only someone who had known danger could sense. Something had shifted, something unseen, but moving closer. He returned to work as if nothing had happened. Golden Panda reopened, the broken glass replaced, the blood scrubbed clean from the alley. Customers still came, unaware of the violence that had been born and buried there. They ordered dumplings, laughed, clinked glasses. Mr. Lee greeted them with his practiced smile, though Min noticed the tremor in his hands when he handled the register. The police hadn't come back since the second fight. No one had filed charges. The gang members had disappeared. That should have brought relief, but it didn't. Peace, Min had learned, often carried the quiet weight of something waiting to break again. Every night, when he closed the kitchen, he would glance at the door, half expecting it to burst open once more. The memory of the gun's metallic glint still hovered in his mind like the afterimage of lightning. He told himself to move on, to keep washing dishes, to keep breathing. But the body doesn't forget what it was trained for. His hands, even when submerged in soap and water, still twitched with reflex, still remembered the geometry of combat, the half-step, the shifting weight, the centerline strike. He tried to ignore it, but every movement in the corner of his vision, every shout from the street, made his muscles tense before his mind could reason. At night, when the city fell into the hum of sleepless engines, Min began to walk again. The same park, the same bench under the old oak. The rain had stopped, but he still felt it in the air. Sometimes he practiced slowly in the dark, the soft movements of Vịnh Xuân blending with the whisper of wind through the leaves. It wasn't for fighting. It was for remembering who he had been, or perhaps who he was trying not to be. Then one evening, as he moved through the first form, he noticed something out of place. A car parked too long at the corner, engine idling, headlights off. He froze, feeling the old instinct crawl up his spine. A figure sat inside, motionless, watching. The shape of the face was hidden behind the glare of the street lamp, but Min knew eyes when they were fixed on him, the quiet kind that waited. He turned away, pretending not to notice, but every nerve in his body had already taken note. The car didn't move for another 10 minutes. When it did, it rolled away slowly, like a predator content to wait for another night. The next day, he mentioned it to Mr. Lee. The old man frowned, worry cutting new lines into his face. "You think it's them?"
"I think someone hasn't forgiven being humiliated," Min said softly.
Mr. Lee sighed.
"You should talk to the police." "I already did once. Talking doesn't stop men who've already decided."
Mr. Lee looked at him long, then nodded. "If they come again, I'll close the restaurant. I've lived through worse in Hong Kong, but I won't drag you into another war." Min smiled faintly. "Sometimes war drags itself to you." The day went on. The lunch rush came and went. Life, pretending to be ordinary, kept moving. But when the sun fell, so did the illusion. They came just before closing again. Not 5 this time, but 7. They didn't shout. They didn't smash bottles or demand money. They just stood there, blocking the exit, their silence more dangerous than any threat. In the center was a man Min hadn't seen before, dressed neatly, wearing a gray coat, his hair slicked back. He didn't look like a street thug. He looked like someone who gave orders. Mr. Lee froze when he saw him. The cooks backed away instinctively. Min stepped out from the kitchen, drying his hands. The air grew heavier, like the moment before a storm breaks. The man in gray smiled politely. "Mr. Lee?" he said. His voice was smooth, too calm. "You've caused my people some trouble." "I told you," Mr. Lee said carefully. "I don't pay for protection I don't need." The man nodded. "Yes, you made that clear. And your dishwasher here." He turned his gaze toward Min, studying him with a kind of detached curiosity. "He made sure we remembered it." Min said nothing. His eyes were steady, his body relaxed but alert. Every detail of the room, the distance to the counter, the placement of the tables, the slickness of the floor, etched itself into his awareness. "I don't like violence," the man continued. "It's messy, but I can't let disrespect spread. You understand?" Mr. Lee's voice wavered. "We're not disrespecting anyone. We just want peace." "Peace," the man said softly. "Peace is expensive." He snapped his fingers. 2 of his men moved forward. Min stepped between them and Mr. Lee, his tone calm but edged with warning. "You don't want to do this." The man in gray tilted his head, intrigued. You think because you beat a few of my dogs, you can scare the wolf himself? Min's jaw tightened. Wolves bleed like dogs. The man smiled, a slow curl of his lips. We'll see. The first attacker lunged, knife flashing under the dim light. Min sidestepped, caught the wrist, twisted. A sharp crack. The man screamed, the blade clattering to the floor. The second came from behind. Min ducked, elbow driving back into ribs, then pivoted, sweeping the leg. Another body fell. The others hesitated only a moment before rushing him together. Min moved like water spilling from a broken jar, fluid, unpredictable. He redirected strikes, used their momentum against them, the old techniques flowing through him as naturally as breath. A kick here, a palm strike there, each movement clean, efficient, controlled. The fight lasted less than a minute. When it ended, 4 men were on the ground, moaning. 2 had fled. Only the man in gray remained standing, expression unreadable. He clapped once, slowly. Beautiful, he said. You remind me of someone I once knew. A man from Saigon, perhaps. Taught Vịnh Xuân. What was his name? Tran Minh, wasn't it? The words hit harder than any punch. Min froze. His name, his real name, hung in the air like a blade. How do you know that? He asked quietly. The man's smile widened. Because once upon a time, one of your students worked for me. The world seemed to tilt. A pulse thundered in Min's ears. Tuan, he said under his breath. The man in gray nodded. He was talented, angry, perfect for this world. He spoke of you often, though not kindly. Said you abandoned him. Said you left him to rot. Min's chest tightened. He could still see Tuan's face, the boy who'd once bowed before him, full of hope, the boy who'd turned that hope into rage. He's dead, Min said. Yes, the man said softly, because he didn't listen. But I did. He told me about your skill, about your discipline. I never believed him until now. He took a step closer. I could use a man like you. Min's voice was cold. I'm not for hire. Everyone's for hire, the man said. You just haven't been offered the right price. He slipped a card from his coat pocket and placed it on a table. Think about it, or next time, I won't come to talk. Then he turned and left, his remaining men dragging their injured comrades behind him. The door swung shut, leaving silence in their wake. Mr. Lee exhaled shakily. Who was that? Min stared at the card on the table. It was plain black, embossed with a single white symbol, a dragon coiled around a knife. Beneath it, a name. Bao. He'd heard it before, whispered among the Vietnamese in L.A. Bao Tran. Once a refugee like him, now a crime lord who ruled the docks and gambling dens with quiet brutality. He's the storm that never ends, Min murmured. Mr. Lee sat down heavily. You can't fight a man like that. I know, Min said, but I can't walk away either. That night, he didn't go home. He stayed at the restaurant long after closing, sitting in the dark, the neon from outside flickering across the floor. The memory of Tuan haunted him more than Bao's threat. All these years he had carried guilt like a scar beneath his skin, and now it had found a new shape. An inheritance of violence passed from teacher to student, now returned in the form of a man like Bao. He poured himself a cup of tea, though it had long gone cold. His reflection in the surface looked older than he remembered, tired, hollow, but unbroken. He thought of his master's words again. Stillness is control, not surrender. Perhaps he had mistaken them all this time. Stillness was not retreat. It was readiness. The sound of a siren drifted through the night, distant but steady. He listened, then stood, took a rag, and began to clean the counter. Every motion deliberate, controlled, waiting. When dawn came, the world looked deceptively peaceful again. Golden Panda opened as usual. Customers returned. Laughter echoed. Yet beneath it all, Min felt the hum of the coming storm, the inevitable confrontation. He knew Bao would not let things end quietly. And somewhere, deep inside, he knew he wouldn't either. The violence had returned to his world, not as chaos, but as destiny. There was no more hiding from it. There was only the question his master had once left him to answer. When peace costs innocence, is violence still sin or duty? He didn't have the answer yet, but he knew the question would find him again soon. And as the afternoon light spilled across the restaurant, washing everything in gold, Min's eyes lifted toward the door, waiting for the next shadow to enter. The night Bao came back into Min's world. Something in him shifted, not violently, not with the heat of rage, but with the quiet inevitability of a tide pulling at the moon. For days afterward, he moved through the hours like a man half living, half listening to a hum only he could hear. The sound of dishwater, the chatter of customers, even the rhythm of traffic outside felt muffled, as if the world had dipped beneath the surface of a deep lake. Bao's card still sat on the counter in his small apartment, untouched but impossible to ignore. Every night, Min stared at it, the way one might stare at a wound that refuses to heal. The symbol, the coiled dragon around the knife, gleamed faintly in the dim light, like an eye watching. He didn't need to call the number printed beneath. The message had already been sent. I know who you are, and I own what's left of your past. It was a strange kind of terror, to be recognized not as the man you'd become, but as the man you'd buried. Mr. Lee noticed the change before anyone else did. The old man would glance at him during lunch rushes, when Min's gaze lingered too long on the door. One afternoon, after the last customer left, Mr. Lee spoke in a low voice. You should leave town. Min didn't look up from the sink. Running never solved anything. Neither does dying, Mr. Lee said sharply. Min paused, the soapy water dripping from his hands. If it comes to that, he said softly, then I'll make sure it means something. Mr. Lee shook his head. You think like a man still trying to pay a debt that can't be paid. But tell me, Min, when does atonement end? Min didn't answer. There was no answer. Guilt wasn't a number that could be balanced. It was a shadow that walked beside you, silent, patient, never aging. That night, he dreamed of Saigon again. The dojo floor slick with sweat and rain, the sound of wooden dummies thudding under practice. He saw Tuan, young, fierce, smiling, moving through the forms with perfect rhythm. Then, suddenly, the smile twisted into rage, the air filling with shouts, the sound of flesh meeting flesh. When Min reached out to stop him, his hand passed through air. Tuan's face blurred, dissolving into Bao's, older, colder, eyes gleaming like glass. He woke before dawn, heart hammering, the ghost of the dream still pulsing behind his eyes. That morning, before heading to work, he did something he hadn't done in years. He pulled a small wooden box from beneath his bed. Inside lay his old Vịnh Xuân training sash, folded neatly beside a pair of hand-wrapped ropes used for conditioning strikes. The fabric smelled faintly of camphor and thyme. He unwrapped the ropes, ran his fingers along their worn fibers, and for a moment felt the weight of memory settle in his chest. Then carefully, he folded everything back and set the box aside. He wasn't ready to use them. Not yet. But the act of touching them had awoken something long dormant. Purpose. The following days passed quietly, almost deceptively so. No thugs came to the restaurant. No strange cars lingered on the corner. But silence, Min knew, was never peace. It was a prelude. And when the first note of that prelude finally came, it arrived in the form of a message. A small envelope slipped under the restaurant's door sometime before dawn. Inside was a photograph.
Min's stomach tightened as he looked at it. It was a picture of Mr. Lee, taken from across the street, blurred but unmistakable, the old man locking the restaurant gate, smiling faintly to himself. Scrawled across the bottom in red marker were 3 words, "You owe me." Min said nothing when he showed it to Mr. Lee later that morning. The old man stared at the photo, his hands trembling slightly. "He's serious," he murmured. "Yes," Min said. "What will you do?" Min looked out the window at the pale wash of sunlight over the street. "I'll go to him." "Are you mad?" Mr. Lee said, his voice cracking. "That man is a devil." Min turned to him, his expression unreadable. "The devil knows my name already. I'd rather face him awake than wait for him in my sleep." He left that night after closing. The city stretched out before him like a map of decisions. The address wasn't on the card. Bao didn't need to write it. Min knew where to go. The docks, near Alameda Street. The place where lost men went to disappear. The smell of salt and oil filled the air as he walked through rows of abandoned warehouses. The water below was black, reflecting the fractured lights of the harbor cranes. He found the building easily. Steel shutters, rusted sign, faint music echoing from inside. Not loud, but deliberate. When he entered, the men guarding the door didn't stop him. They looked him over once, recognized him, and stepped aside. Word traveled fast in that world. Bao waited at the far end of the warehouse, seated behind a long table littered with open ledgers and whiskey glasses. He was alone, though Min knew that eyes watched from every shadow. "Min," Bao said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten how to knock." "You made it easy to find you." Bao poured 2 glasses of whiskey, gesturing to the empty chair. "Drink. We're men of memory, aren't we?" Min stayed standing. "You sent me a message." Bao lifted his glass. "I sent a reminder." "I don't owe you anything." Bao chuckled. "No? I think you do. You owe me for Tuan. You owe me for humiliating my men. You owe me for thinking you could walk away from what you are." "I walked away because I didn't want to become you." Bao leaned forward, his expression sharpening. "But you are me. You just hide it better." Min's jaw tightened. "What do you want?" Bao leaned back, studying him. "There's a shipment arriving tomorrow night. My men will escort it. You'll make sure it goes smoothly. Consider it repayment for the trouble you've caused." "And if I refuse?" Bao smiled thinly. "Then I burn your peace down to ashes." Starting with the old man. The air between them thickened. Min's fists clenched, the tendons in his arms tightening like wires. For a moment, he imagined lunging across the table, ending it right there. But he didn't move. Bao's calm told him everything. The room was lined with eyes, and behind those eyes were guns. He turned to leave. "Min," Bao called softly. "You can't wash blood away forever. Some stains just need more blood to cover them." Min walked out without looking back. The rain began again that night, soft at first, then heavier. He didn't go home. Instead, he walked the city until dawn, trying to think of a way out. Every choice led to violence. Every path ended in blood. When he finally returned to his apartment, he opened the wooden box again. This time, he didn't just touch the ropes. He wrapped them around his wrists, the old ritual returning to his fingers like a forgotten prayer. He looked at his reflection in the mirror. The dishwasher was gone. The fighter had returned, whether he wanted it or not. That evening, as the city lights bled into the river, Min made his way back to the docks. He wasn't there to protect Bao's shipment. He was there to end it. The operation was larger than he expected. Trucks, crates, armed guards pacing under the rain. From a distance, he could see Bao's men unloading containers marked with foreign stamps. Drugs, probably, or weapons. the same poison that had destroyed the streets back home. Min moved like shadow between the stacks, silent, precise. He waited until two guards separated from the group, then struck. A sweep, a blow to the throat, another to the ribs. They fell without a sound. He dragged their bodies out of sight, took one of their radios, listened. Voices crackled through the static. Bao's men were everywhere. It didn't matter. He wasn't here to survive. He was here to end the circle. When he reached the main platform, he saw Bao himself overseeing the operation. The man stood under an umbrella, immaculate even in the storm, giving quiet orders. Min stepped into the open. For a heartbeat, no one noticed him. Then a shout. "It's him!" The chaos erupted instantly. Min moved before the first gun could fire. He dove behind a crate as bullets shattered the rain. The world exploded into motion. Thunder, steel, screams. He rolled, disarmed one man, used his weapon to fire a warning shot that sent the rest scattering. When they came at him, he met them in close quarters, where guns meant nothing. Hands, feet, elbows. His body became memory. Every lesson, every mistake, every ghost, all flowing into one violent grace. Men fell, one after another. The ground became slick with rain and blood. He felt pain, but it didn't register. He felt alive, in the terrible, familiar way that warriors do when the world narrows to a single rhythm: fight or fall. Then Bao's voice cut through the chaos. "Enough!" The gunshot came not from Min, but from Bao. The sound was sharp, final. Min froze, a searing pain ripping through his shoulder. He staggered, falling to one knee. Bao approached, calm amid the storm, his gun steady. "You could have been my right hand," he said, "but instead, you chose to be my ghost." Min forced himself to stand. Blood soaked through his sleeve, his breathing ragged. "You don't own ghosts," he said quietly. Bao smirked. "Maybe not, but I can bury them." He raised the gun again, and then a voice shouted from behind him. "Police! Drop it!" Flashing lights flooded the docks, sirens screaming over the rain. Officers surged forward, shouting commands. For a second, Bao hesitated, and that second was all Min needed. He lunged, the movement pure instinct. His hand struck Bao's wrist, twisting it until the gun clattered to the ground. The two men crashed into the wet concrete, grappling in the mud. The world narrowed to breath and motion. Bao's face twisted with fury, his fist slamming into Min's ribs. Min countered, drove his palm into Bao's chest. When it was over, Bao lay still, not dead, just broken, staring up at the rain as if it might explain something. Min stood over him, trembling, the pain in his shoulder radiating down his arm. The police rushed in, pulling them apart, shouting orders. He didn't resist. He just looked at Bao one last time, rain dripping from his chin, and said softly, "You were right about one thing. Blood always calls for more blood." They took him to the hospital that night, not to jail. Mr. Lee had spoken for him. The officers from before had intervened. They said he was a hero. He didn't feel like one. When he woke, dawn was seeping through the window. The bandages on his shoulder were tight. The air smelled of antiseptic and rain. Mr. Lee sat beside him, holding a small thermos of tea. "You lived," the old man said, smiling through tears. "For now," Min whispered. Mr. Lee placed the thermos in his hands. "Then maybe it's time you start living for more than atonement." Min looked out the window at the gray horizon. The storm had passed, but the city still glistened with its memory. He didn't know what came next, only that the cycle had to end somewhere. Maybe not through peace, maybe not through violence, but through choice. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe that he could still make one. Outside, the rain began again, gentle this time, almost forgiving. He closed his eyes, listening to it fall. Morning came like a whisper. A soft, golden light slid through the hospital blinds, painting stripes across the floor. The world outside seemed to move in slow motion. Footsteps in the hallway, the steady hum of a cleaning cart, the muted laughter of nurses at the far end of the corridor. Min sat propped against the bed, his shoulder bound tight in bandages, the faint ache reminding him that he was still alive. He hadn't dreamt that night. For the first time in years, his sleep had been empty, untroubled. No dojo, no rain, no ghost of Tuan calling from the past. Just darkness, quiet and complete. And when he woke, there was a weight in his chest. Not guilt, not pain, but something gentler, something close to peace. Mr. Lee returned mid-morning, carrying a paper bag that smelled faintly of ginger and pork. "They said you're free to leave tomorrow," he said, setting the food down by the bed. "You're lucky. Bao's people are scattered. The police say he won't walk again for months. His empire's done." Min didn't look relieved. "Empires never end," he said softly. "They just change names." Mr. Lee sighed, taking a seat by the window. "You're right, but for now, at least, he's gone. You should rest. Maybe leave the city for a while." Min turned to look at him, a faint smile on his lips. "Where would I go?" "Anywhere but here." He chuckled quietly. "You sound like a man who's never washed dishes for a living." Mr. Lee laughed, the sound small but warm. "You're a strange one, Min. You save my life twice, destroy half a gang, and still joke about washing plates." "It's what I know best," Min said. Silence fell between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two men who had survived something together and didn't need to fill the space with words. Outside, the city went on. Sirens, laughter, the hum of life returning to its usual chaos. Min stared at the light breaking over the rooftops, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a world he didn't belong to. When Mr. Lee finally left, promising to bring more tea, Min sat for a long while, listening to the sounds of life echoing faintly down the corridor. Then he pulled a small notebook from the drawer beside his bed. Inside were sketches, pages of careful strokes drawn over sleepless nights, hands in motion, the stance of a fighter, the balance of centerline, the discipline of form. He flipped to a blank page and began to write. Not instructions, not philosophy, just words that felt like breath escaping. Vịnh Xuân was never about victory. It was about understanding. The fist strikes not to punish, but to remind the heart of what still beats. The hand deflects not to reject the world, but to meet it halfway. Violence is a ripple. Peace is knowing when to let it fade. He closed the notebook and leaned back, watching the sunlight creep across the ceiling. He thought of Tuan again. Not the angry boy at the end, but the child at the beginning. The one who had laughed when he first learned to balance on one leg, who had stayed after class to clean the floor, who had once said, "Thay, when I grow up, I'll be strong enough that no one will ever hurt me again." That boy was gone. But maybe, Min thought, his strength hadn't been wasted. It had just taken a different shape, passed down through the struggle, reshaped by regret, softened by time. When he left the hospital the next day, the city was drenched in morning light. Mr. Lee insisted on driving him back to the restaurant, though Min argued he could walk. The old man refused. "You've done enough walking for one life," he said. Golden Panda looked the same from the outside, though the broken sign above the door had been repaired, its gold letters gleaming under the sun. Inside, everything was spotless. Too spotless, Min thought. A sign that someone had tried too hard to erase the memory of violence. A small crowd of familiar faces greeted him. Cooks, servers, even a few customers. They clapped awkwardly when he walked in, as if unsure whether to celebrate or bow. Someone had hung a hand-painted sign above the counter. "Thank you, Min." He smiled politely, nodded, said a few quiet words, but he didn't stay long. Crowds made him uneasy. Gratitude made him restless. He slipped out the back door after a few minutes, breathing in the cool air of the alley. The dumpsters had been replaced, the walls scrubbed clean, even the faint smell of blood and soy had vanished. But when he closed his eyes, he could still see the shadows, the ghosts of that night. He didn't hate them. They were part of him now. That evening, he returned to his small apartment, packed a few clothes into a duffel bag, and took one last look around. The walls were bare except for a single framed photograph. His old dojo in Saigon, faded and curling at the edges. The students in the photo grinned awkwardly at the camera, their stances uneven, their eyes bright. Min stood at the center, younger, smiling in a way he barely remembered knowing how to. He touched the frame once, then set it gently on the counter. Before he left, he opened the wooden box one last time. Inside, the training sash and ropes waited, still folded, still patient. He ran his fingers over them, then took them out and placed them in the bag. Not as weapons, as reminders. By nightfall, he was gone. He didn't tell Mr. Lee where he was going, only left a note on the kitchen counter. Thank you for the second chance. Take care of the restaurant. Teach someone how to make the soup right. Don't let the world harden you. I'm going home. Not to Saigon, but somewhere quieter. He took a bus east that night, the city shrinking behind him, neon dissolving into darkness. He didn't have a destination, only a direction, away from noise, toward silence. The hum of the road soothed him. Every turn of the wheels felt like a shedding of skin. Days passed. Cities blurred into each other. Small towns, empty highways, the long sprawl of desert giving way to mountains. He spoke to no one, ate simply, slept lightly. Somewhere near Oregon, he stepped off the bus at dawn, drawn by the sight of fog curling over a small riverside town. It wasn't home, not yet, but it could be. He found work easily, at a local repair shop run by a man named Ray, an old veteran with a bad leg and a good heart. Ray didn't ask questions. He took one look at Min, nodded and said, "You look like someone who knows how to fix things that aren't supposed to be fixed." Min smiled. Something like that. Days turned into weeks. The rhythm of work became his meditation again. Oil-stained hands, the hum of engines, the quiet satisfaction of making something function where there had been only rust and noise. At night, he stayed in a small cabin by the river, a single light glowing through the window. The water's movement became his teacher, slow, unyielding, yet soft enough to shape stone. Sometimes, when the fog thickened and the world fell silent, he practiced again. The forms of Vịnh Xuân flowed through him, but slower now, gentler, as if he were conversing with the air instead of fighting it. The movements no longer felt like punishment. They were prayer. Children from the town sometimes gathered by the river to watch him, whispering behind their hands. One day, a small boy approached, clutching a stick like a sword. "Mister, are you doing kung fu?" Min stopped, smiling faintly. "Something like that." "Can you teach me?" the boy asked. Min looked down at the stick, then at the boy's eager face. "Maybe," he said, "but only if you promise never to use it to hurt anyone." The boy nodded solemnly. "I promise." And so it began, quietly, without fanfare, without signs or fees. Just a few children in the grass by the river, learning balance and patience, learning how to move without breaking the world around them. Ray watched sometimes from a distance, shaking his head with a smile. "Didn't peg you for a teacher," he'd say. "I didn't either," Min would reply. Years slipped by. The scar on his shoulder faded, the ache in his chest softened. News from the city came now and then. Bao had been arrested, then vanished from headlines. Mr. Lee had retired, handing the restaurant to his niece. The world kept spinning. And one day, Min realized he no longer flinched when he heard thunder. The rain had become just rain again. He grew older. His hair thinned, silvering at the edges. The children he'd taught grew taller, then moved away. Some to college, some to lives he would never see. But each one carried a little of what he'd given them, a way of standing, a way of breathing, a way of seeing the world not as something to conquer but to understand. On his final winter by the river, Min stood at the water's edge, watching the snow fall into the current. The air was cold enough to sting, but he didn't feel it much. He moved through the forms one last time, the same sequence his master had once taught him under a leaking roof in Saigon. His hands cut through the air with the ease of memory, his breath steady. When he finished, he bowed, to the river, to the sky, to the invisible faces of those who had come before and after. "They," he whispered softly, though there was no one left to hear it. "I've kept the balance." The snow kept falling, soft as ash. Later that night, Ray found him sitting on the bench by the river, a small smile frozen on his face, eyes closed, hands resting gently on his knees. The lantern beside him was still burning, its flame flickering against the dark. They buried him beneath the oak tree overlooking the water. No stone, no marker, just a smooth river rock with a single word carved into it: stillness. And when the wind blew across the water, it carried with it the faint echo of movement, a whisper, a flow, a rhythm that sounded almost like a heartbeat.